Sarah remained in her classroom preparing for the next day's lessons. The space was warm and inviting, filled with student work, comfortable reading areas, and the quiet hum of learning in progress. 3 years ago, she had believed that losing her corporate position was the worst thing that could happen. Now she understood it had been the beginning of finding her true calling, work that combined her natural gifts with her deepest values, creating impact that extended far beyond any quarterly profit report. She had lost everything she thought she wanted and discovered everything she actually needed. The journey from corporate executive to classroom teacher had been painful, uncertain, and transformative, but it had led her to a life of purpose, connection, and joy that no external achievement could have provided. Sarah looked around her classroom one final time before turning off the lights. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to make a difference in individual lives. She had found her place in the world, and it was exactly where she belonged. Before she lost everything, she had no idea what would happen. After that, she had found a new life, one built on service rather than success, contribution rather than accumulation, and the unshakable knowledge that meaning comes from helping others discover their own potential. The transformation was complete, but the work continued, one student at a time, one relationship at a time, one moment of discovery at a time. Sarah explained to a group of teachers from Hartford. It's the underlying philosophy, treating each child as an individual with unique strengths rather than a problem to be fixed or a score to be improved. Later that evening, at a reception in her honor, Sarah found herself in conversation with state education officials about expanding her work. The governor's award had brought statewide attention to the Literacy Center's success, and there was growing interest in scaling up the program. We'd like to fund demonstration sites in 10 districts next year, explained Commissioner Patricia Walsh. Your model could influence how we approach reading instruction throughout Connecticut. The opportunity was exciting, but Sarah had learned to balance ambition with wisdom. Rapid expansion could dilute the personal relationships and community partnerships that made the program effective. I'm interested, Sarah replied, but only if we can maintain the quality and community focus that makes this work. I'd rather help 5 schools do this well than try to implement it in 50 schools. Superficially, the conversation continued over dinner, exploring ways to expand impact while preserving the essential elements that had made the original program successful. Sarah found herself drawing on skills from her corporate background: strategic thinking, project management, stakeholder relations, but applying them to entirely different ends. As the evening wound down, Sarah stepped outside the reception venue and called her parents to share the day's events. Her father's voice carried pride that went beyond the public recognition. Sarah, your mother and I have been talking about how proud we are not just of the award, but of the person you've become. You found your way back to who you were always meant to be. What do you mean? That 8-year-old girl who wanted to help people learn, she was always there, even when you were chasing other dreams. Sometimes we have to lose our way to find our true path. The conversation brought Sarah full circle to the journey that had begun with devastating professional failure and personal crisis. Every loss had been necessary: the corporate position that no longer fit, the expensive lifestyle that had become a prison, the identity built on external validation rather than internal purpose. Driving home through the Connecticut countryside, Sarah reflected on the unexpected trajectory that had brought her to this moment. The girl who had dreamed of teaching had become the woman who built her career in advertising, then returned to education through a path of loss and rediscovery that had made her a more effective educator than she could have been without that circuitous journey. Her corporate experience had taught her project management, strategic thinking, and leadership skills that she now applied to educational innovation. Her personal crisis had developed empathy, resilience, and the ability to connect with others facing their own challenges. Every experience, even the painful ones, had contributed to her current capacity to make a meaningful difference. The Literacy Center continued evolving, now serving over 70 students with a staff of 5 teachers and countless community volunteers. But its impact extended far beyond reading scores and graduation rates. It had become a model for how schools could serve as community hubs, connecting families with resources and opportunities while celebrating the diverse strengths each person brought to the collective effort. Maria stopped by Sarah's classroom the following Monday, carrying acceptance letters from 3 prestigious colleges offering full scholarships. "Miss Sarah, I have news. I got into MIT, Stanford, and Brown. Can you believe it?" Sarah felt the familiar surge of pride that came from watching former students achieve their dreams. But what moved her most was Maria's next announcement. "I've decided to study education and engineering. I want to design learning technologies that help kids like I used to be the ones who are smart but need different ways to show it." "That sounds perfect, Maria. You'll help so many children, just like you helped me." "Miss Sarah, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't lost your advertising job?" Sarah considered the question that she'd asked herself many times over the past 3 years. "I think I would have stayed stuck in a life that looked successful but felt empty." Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you really need. Are you glad it happened? "I'm grateful for all of it, the success, the failure, the fear, the discovery. Every piece was necessary to bring me here." As Maria left to share her college news with other teachers. "But I'm committed to classroom teaching right now. Perhaps in a few years, when I've gained more experience, I'll be ready for that kind of leadership role." "Are you sure? This opportunity won't come again." "I understand, but I've learned that the right opportunities tend to appear when you're ready for them." Dr. Williams was relieved when Sarah shared her decision to remain at the school. "Honestly, I was worried we might lose you to something bigger. But I'm glad you recognize that what we're doing here is already big, just in a different way." That afternoon, Sarah worked with a new student, a 4th grader named David, who had just transferred from another district. His previous teachers had labeled him as having attention deficit issues, but Sarah suspected he was simply bored by instruction that didn't match his learning style. "David, what are you most curious about?" she asked during their first session. "Space. I want to be an astronaut." "Perfect. Let's learn to read using books about space exploration." As she watched David's eyes light up while reading about the International Space Station, Sarah felt the familiar rush of satisfaction that came from connecting with individual students. This was her work, not managing educational initiatives from a distant office, but sitting beside children and helping them discover their own capabilities. The ripple effects of the Literacy Center continued expanding throughout the community. Other teachers were adapting Sarah's methods in their own classrooms. Parents were volunteering in unprecedented numbers. Local organizations were developing their own partnerships with the school. Most importantly, children who had once struggled with reading were now helping other students, creating a cycle of support and encouragement that extended far beyond any single program or initiative. Sarah had learned that meaningful change happened one relationship at a time, one child at a time, one moment of connection at a time. The ripple effects were powerful precisely because they were personal, authentic, and rooted in genuine care for individual human potential. 3 years after losing everything she thought mattered, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the Connecticut State Capitol, preparing to receive the Governor's Award for Educational Innovation. The recognition was significant, the first time a classroom teacher had been honored with the state's highest educational award. But as she looked out at the audience, Sarah's attention focused on the familiar faces in the front rows. Her parents, now both healthy and volunteering regularly at the Literacy Center. Dr. Williams, whose support had made everything possible. Emma, who had driven up from New York, where she was now directing educational programs for 3 major museums, and scattered throughout the auditorium, former students and their families who had traveled to witness this moment. Maria, now in 10th grade and already accepted to a summer program at Yale. Marcus, whose poetry collection had been published by a small press. Tommy, Jessica, David, and dozens of other children whose lives had been touched by the simple belief that every person possessed unique gifts worth discovering. Education, Sarah began her acceptance speech, is not about filling empty vessels with predetermined knowledge. It's about helping each person discover their own capacity for growth, contribution, and joy. She spoke about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the corporate success that had felt hollow, the devastating losses that had forced her to examine her values, and the gradual discovery of work that aligned with her deepest sense of purpose. I used to measure success by external achievement, salary, title, possessions, status. But I've learned that true fulfillment comes from using whatever gifts you have to serve something larger than yourself. The audience, educators, legislators, parents, and students listened intently as Sarah described the transformation that was possible when communities committed to seeing every child as capable of growth and contribution. The literacy center we've built together represents more than reading instruction. It's proof that when we invest in human potential with patience, creativity, and unwavering belief, extraordinary things become possible. After the ceremony, Sarah was surrounded by educators eager to discuss replicating her model in their own communities. The requests came from urban districts struggling with limited resources, suburban schools seeking more innovative approaches, and rural communities looking for ways to connect classroom learning with local culture and opportunities. The key is in the specific methods we use. The Senior Center had established a weekly intergenerational reading program. The public library had created special collections curated by Sarah's students. Maria, now in 7th grade and clearly college-bound, had become Sarah's informal teaching assistant. She worked with younger students, demonstrating that academic success was achievable regardless of background or initial skill level. Miss Sarah taught me that being smart isn't about knowing everything, Maria explained to a group of new students. It's about being curious and willing to keep learning. The ripple effects extended beyond the school walls. Carmen, Maria's mother, had enrolled in ESL classes at the community college after gaining confidence through her involvement in the Literacy Center's family engagement activities. Other parents had pursued their own educational goals, inspired by their children's academic growth. You've created something bigger than a reading program, Dr. Williams observed during Sarah's annual evaluation. You've started a movement that's transforming how this entire community thinks about education and opportunity. The recognition was gratifying, but Sarah's greatest satisfaction came from unexpected moments of connection, like the afternoon when former student Jessica, now in 2nd grade, brought her baby brother to the center and announced that she was going to teach him to read the Miss Sarah way. Or when Marcus's poetry was selected for publication in a national anthology of young writers. These individual successes represented something larger, proof that every child possessed unique gifts waiting to be discovered and nurtured. Sarah's corporate background had taught her to identify talent and develop potential, skills that translated perfectly to education but with infinitely more meaningful outcomes. One May afternoon, Sarah received a phone call that would test her commitment to her new path. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the recruiter who had struggled to place her 2 years earlier, had an unexpected proposition. Sarah, I hope you remember me. I have an opportunity that I think might interest you. I'm happy where I am, Rebecca, but I'm curious what you have in mind. Morrison Industries is launching an educational foundation focused on literacy programs in underserved communities. They need someone to direct the initiative, someone with both corporate experience and proven success in educational innovation. The salary would be substantial, and you'd have resources to expand your work nationally. The offer was tempting in multiple ways. Leading a national foundation would amplify her impact, potentially helping thousands of children rather than dozens. The financial compensation would provide security and opportunities she couldn't achieve on a teacher's salary. Most intriguingly, it would combine her corporate skills with her educational passion. They specifically requested you, Rebecca continued. Your work in Connecticut has gained national attention. This could be your chance to scale up everything you've accomplished. Sarah asked for time to consider the offer, then spend the evening walking through her neighborhood and reflecting on the decision. The opportunity was genuinely appealing, a chance to influence educational policy, secure funding for innovative programs, and reach children across the country, but something about the corporate foundation structure felt like a step backward toward the world she'd deliberately left behind. Board meetings, quarterly reports, budget negotiations, all the elements of business life that had once energized her but now seemed like distractions from actual teaching and learning. She called Emma for perspective, knowing her friend would understand the complexity of the decision. "It sounds like an amazing opportunity," Emma said. "But what does your gut tell you?" "That I'm not ready to leave direct service yet. Maybe someday I'll want to work at a policy level. But right now I love being in the classroom with actual students." "Then there's your answer. But am I being short-sighted, passing up a chance to help more children because I prefer the immediate satisfaction of individual relationships?" "Sarah, you've learned to trust your instincts about what fulfills you. Why would you abandon that now?" The conversation helped clarify Sarah's thinking. She had left corporate life not just because of external pressures, but because the work itself had become disconnected from her values. Taking a foundation position might recreate the same sense of disconnection, even if the mission was educational rather than commercial. The next morning, Sarah called Rebecca to decline the offer. "I'm honored to be considered." The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sarah Mitchell's corner office on the 32nd floor of the Chrysler Building in Manhattan. At 34, she had everything she thought she wanted: a six-figure salary as a marketing director at one of New York's most prestigious advertising agencies, a penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, and a wardrobe that could grace the pages of Vogue. Sarah adjusted her Hermes scarf as she reviewed the quarterly report spread across her mahogany desk. The numbers were impressive. Her team had exceeded their targets by 15%, securing major accounts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. Her phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages from colleagues and clients. Another successful campaign launch, she murmured to herself, sipping her third espresso of the day. The caffeine had become as essential as breathing, fueling her relentless pursuit of perfection. Her assistant, Jessica, knocked on the glass door. "Sarah, the board meeting has been moved up to PM. They want to discuss the Morrison account." "Perfect," Sarah replied, not looking up from her screen. "I've been preparing for this moment for months." The Morrison account was worth $12 million, the largest client the agency had ever pursued. Landing it would secure Sarah's promotion to vice president and the corner office she'd coveted since joining the company 5 years ago. As she walked through the bustling agency floor, employees nodded respectfully. Sarah had built her reputation on being tough but fair, demanding excellence while mentoring younger talent. She thrived in the competitive atmosphere of Madison Avenue, where every pitch could make or break careers. During lunch at her usual spot, a trendy bistro frequented by Manhattan's elite, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's number from their family home in suburban Connecticut. "Hi, Mom. I only have 15 minutes before my next meeting." "Sarah, honey, your father and I were wondering if you'd visit this weekend. We barely see you anymore." Sarah glanced at her Rolex. "I can this weekend. The Morrison presentation is Monday, and I need to perfect every detail." "You work too much, sweetheart. Remember, success means nothing if you don't have people to share it with." "Mom, we've discussed this. I'm building something important here. Once I make VP, things will calm down." After ending the call, Sarah felt a familiar pang of guilt, quickly suppressed by the adrenaline of her upcoming presentation. She had sacrificed personal relationships for professional achievement, convincing herself it was temporary. Back at the office, Sarah gathered her team in the conference room. The presentation materials were flawless market research, creative concepts, and projected ROI calculations that would make any client's eyes light up. "This is it, everyone," she announced to her team of 8 talented marketers. "Tomorrow we land the biggest client in the agency's history." Her team responded with enthusiasm, though Sarah noticed dark circles under several pairs of eyes. They'd been working 16-hour days for weeks, but she pushed the observation aside. Excellence required sacrifice. As evening approached, Manhattan's skyline glowed with office lights, a testament to the city's relentless energy. Sarah remained at her desk, fine-tuning the presentation one final time. The cleaning crew had come and gone, leaving her alone with her ambitions and the hum of the building's ventilation system. She looked at a framed photo on her desk, herself receiving an industry award the previous year. No family members stood beside her in the image, They'd been unable to attend due to her father's work schedule. She told herself it didn't matter, that professional recognition was enough. Her reflection in the darkened window showed a successful woman in an expensive suit, but something in her eyes seemed hollow. She dismissed the thought, focusing instead on tomorrow's opportunity. Everything I've worked for comes down to this, she whispered to the empty office. As Sarah finally left the building near midnight, the city streets pulsed with life. Yellow cabs honked through traffic, couples walked hand in hand toward late-night restaurants, and the energy of 8 million dreams filled the air. She belonged here, in this world of endless possibility and ruthless ambition. Her apartment awaited, pristine, expensive, and perfectly decorated. Yet as she unlocked the door, stepping into the silence, she couldn't shake the feeling that something essential was missing. The thought vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by mental rehearsals of tomorrow's presentation. Success was within her grasp, and Sarah Mitchell had never been one to let opportunities slip away. The Morrison Industries boardroom occupied an entire floor of their Midtown headquarters, with windows offering a panoramic view of Central Park. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early, her presentation materials organized with military precision. She wore her lucky navy blue suit, the same outfit she'd worn when landing her 3 biggest accounts. The Morrison team filed in at exactly p.m. CEO Robert Morrison, a silver-haired man in his 60s known for his no-nonsense approach. CFO Patricia Hendricks, whose reputation for financial scrutiny was legendary, and Marketing VP David Chen, whom Sarah had met at several industry conferences. Miss Mitchell, Morrison said, extending his hand. Your agency's reputation precedes you. We're excited to see what you've prepared. Sarah launched into her presentation with the confidence that had defined her career. Market analysis, consumer demographics, creative concepts, everything flowed seamlessly. The Morrison team nodded appreciatively as she outlined a comprehensive campaign that would position their new product line as the industry leader. Impressive work, Patricia commented during the Q&A session. Your market research is thorough, and the creative direction aligns with our brand values. For 90 minutes, Sarah fielded questions with expertise and poise. She could see the approval in their eyes, feel the electricity of a deal about to close. This was why she'd sacrificed weekends, vacations, and relationships for moments like this. We'll need some time to discuss internally, Morrison said as the presentation concluded. But I'll be honest, this is exactly the caliber of work we were hoping to see. Sarah returned to her office walking on air. Her team gathered around as she recounted the meeting, their faces reflecting her excitement. They'd all invested countless hours in this project, and success seemed within reach. Drinks to celebrate? Suggested Mark, her senior creative director. Let's wait until it's official, Sarah replied, though her smile betrayed her confidence. But start thinking about how we'll structure the team for implementation. At 4:30 p.m., her phone rang. Robert Morrison's name appeared on the caller ID, and Sarah's pulse quickened. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Morrison, thank you for calling so quickly. Sarah, I'll get straight to the point. Your presentation was outstanding, probably the best we've seen in years. Sarah's heart soared, but something in Morrison's tone made her hesitate. However, he continued, we've decided to go with Blackstone and Associates. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah gripped the phone tighter, struggling to process what she'd heard. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? We're awarding the contract to Blackstone. Their proposal came in significantly under budget, and they have an existing relationship with our parent company. But our creative approach, the market research, was exceptional. Truly. But in today's economic climate, budget considerations take precedence. I hope you understand. The call ended with polite pleasantries that Sarah barely registered. She sat in stunned silence, staring at the presentation materials scattered across her desk. 6 months of work, countless late nights, her team's dedication, all rendered meaningless in a 30-second phone call. Jessica appeared at her door with a stack of messages. How did it go? You look pale. We didn't get it. The words felt foreign in Sarah's mouth. In her 5 years at the agency, she'd never lost a major pitch. Her track record was unblemished, her reputation built on consistent victories. Word spread quickly through the office. Sarah watched her team's faces fall. As Mark shared the news, their excitement dissolving into disappointment. These people had trusted her leadership, sacrificed their personal time based on her confidence. ATPM Agency President William Harrison summoned Sarah to his office. The space was intimidating by design, awards covering the walls, client photos showcasing decades of successful campaigns, and Harrison himself positioned behind a desk that seemed as large as a small car. "Sarah, I heard about Morrison. Disappointing news. It was a budget decision, not a reflection of our work quality." Harrison nodded, but his expression remained serious. "That's the third major account we've lost this quarter. Jameson Industries, Peterson Financial, and now Morrison. The board is asking questions." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Those were different circumstances. Jameson went with an internal team. Peterson delayed their launch. "I know the details," Harrison interrupted. "But perception is reality in this business. Clients talk to each other, and right now, our reputation is taking hits." "What are you saying?" Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with the calculating gaze that had made him one of Madison Avenue's most feared executives. "I'm saying we need to reassess your role. The VP position we discussed, that's on hold indefinitely." The word struck deeper than the Morrison rejection. Sarah had restructured her entire life around that promotion, made sacrifices that seemed reasonable only if they led to greater success. "William, my track record speaks for itself. One difficult quarter doesn't erase 5 years of excellence." "It's not about the past, Sarah. It's about what happens next. Take some time to regroup. Maybe consider adjusting your approach. The industry is changing, and we all need to adapt." Sarah left Harrison's office feeling like she was walking underwater. The familiar office environment suddenly seemed foreign, as if she were seeing it through someone else's eyes. Colleagues who usually sought her advice now avoided eye contact. Sensing the shift in her status, she stayed late again, but this time not by choice. The penthouse apartment that had once felt like a sanctuary now loomed before her like a monument to misplaced priorities. For the first time in years, Sarah questioned whether everything she'd built was as solid as it appeared. The city lights twinkled below as she finally gathered her belongings. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, doubt crept in like fog through the canyon streets of Manhattan. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of mounting pressure and diminishing confidence. Sarah threw herself into new pitches with desperate intensity, working 18-hour days in an attempt to reclaim her position. But the harder she pushed, the more elusive success became. The Henderson Group presentation went poorly when Sarah's market research contradicted the client's internal data. The Riverside Hospital campaign was rejected for being too aggressive for their family-friendly image. Each failure felt like another crack in the foundation she'd spent years building. Her team began showing signs of strain. Emma, one of her most promising junior executives, requested a transfer to another department. Mark started questioning her strategic decisions in ways he never had before. "Maybe we should consider a softer approach," he suggested during a brainstorming session for a luxury hotel chain. "Something more emotional, less data-driven." "Data drives results," Sarah snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. "I'm sorry. I'm just focused on getting this right." Mark's expression revealed concern that went beyond professional disappointment. "Sarah, when's the last time you took a real break? Not just a weekend, but actual time off?" The question hung in the air. Sarah couldn't remember her last vacation, real vacation, not the working trips where she'd answered emails from beach resorts. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being indispensable, irreplaceable, always available. That evening, her phone rang while she reviewed competitor analysis reports. Her father's voice sounded different, older, more fragile than she remembered. "Sarah, I need to tell you something important." "Dad, if this is about missing Sunday dinner again, I'm sick, sweetheart. The doctors found something in my lungs." The report slipped from Sarah's hands, scattering across her apartment floor. What do you mean, sick? Lung cancer. Stage 3. Your mother wanted to tell you in person, but I insisted on calling. We didn't want you worrying unnecessarily. Worrying unnecessarily? Sarah's voice cracked. Dad, when did you find out? 2 weeks ago. We've been trying to reach you, but Jessica always says you're in meetings. The guilt hit like a physical weight. While she'd been obsessing over client pitches and presentation materials, her father had been facing a cancer diagnosis alone. How many calls had she dismissed? How many family dinners had she skipped for work that now seemed trivial? I'm coming home this weekend. You don't need to change your schedule, Dad. Stop. I'm coming home. The drive to Connecticut the following Saturday gave Sarah time to think something she'd avoided for months. The autumn foliage along I-95 was spectacular, reminding her of childhood trips to apple orchards with her parents. When had she stopped noticing beauty that didn't contribute to quarterly profits? Her childhood home looked smaller than she remembered, but her parents' embrace felt larger. Her father appeared thinner, more fragile, though he maintained the gentle smile that had comforted her through countless childhood anxieties. You look tired, honey, her mother said, studying Sarah's face over coffee in the familiar kitchen. Are you taking care of yourself? I'm fine, Mom. Tell me about Dad's treatment plan. They spent the afternoon discussing chemotherapy schedules, hospital appointments, and the practical adjustments required for her father's care. Sarah found herself making mental notes about flights between New York and Hartford, calculating how often she could visit without completely abandoning her work responsibilities. I can work remotely some days, she offered. Be here for appointments. Help with whatever you need. Her father reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Sarah, you don't have to fix this. You don't have to fix everything. The words stopped her short. Wasn't fixing things what she did? Wasn't problem solving her greatest strength? That Sunday evening, driving back to Manhattan, Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with work emails. A client wanted revisions on a campaign that wouldn't launch for 6 weeks. Another demanded a conference call to discuss strategy adjustments that could wait until Monday. The urgent requests that had once energized her now felt suffocating. Monday morning brought another blow. William Harrison's assistant called at M, requesting an immediate meeting. Sarah's stomach knotted as she rode the elevator to the executive floor. Sarah, we need to discuss the Paramount Fitness account, Harrison said without preamble. They've expressed concerns about the campaign direction. Paramount Fitness was Sarah's last major client, a relationship she'd cultivated for 3 years. If they pulled their business, her position would become truly precarious. What specific concerns? They feel the messaging isn't resonating with their core demographic. The preliminary testing showed lower engagement than projected. Sarah had reviewed those test results the previous week. The numbers were within acceptable ranges, nothing that couldn't be adjusted with minor modifications. But in her current weakened position, even minor problems became major threats. I can revise the creative direction, incorporate their feedback. They've already decided to explore other options. I'm sorry, Sarah. The meeting continued, but Sarah barely heard the details. Her mind reeled with the implications. 3 major client losses in 2 months would be impossible to explain away. Her reputation, built over years of careful cultivation, was crumbling faster than she could react. Walking back to her office, Sarah noticed colleagues' expressions, sympathy mixed with the professional distance that accompanied failure in their industry. Success was magnetic in advertising. Failure was contagious. That afternoon, she called her parents to check on her father's first chemotherapy appointment. His voice was weak but optimistic, and her mother provided updates with the matter-of-fact tone she used for difficult situations. The doctors are encouraging, her mother said. It's going to be a long process, but there's reason for hope. Hope. The word felt foreign to Sarah now. For years, she'd operated on certainty, measurable goals, quantifiable achievements, predictable outcomes. Hope required surrendering control, accepting uncertainty, trusting in possibilities beyond her influence. As evening settled over Manhattan, Sarah sat in her pristine apartment, surrounded by the material evidence of her success. But the achievements felt hollow now, disconnected from anything that truly mattered. She'd built an impressive life on paper while neglecting the relationships and experiences that gave life meaning. The first crack had appeared weeks ago with the Morrison Industries rejection. Now, those cracks were spreading, threatening to bring down everything she'd constructed with such careful ambition. The call came on a gray Tuesday morning in late October. Sarah was reviewing budget projections when Jessica's voice came through the intercom, unusually formal and strained. "Sarah, Mr. Harrison needs to see you in his office immediately. He's asked you to bring your project files." The request to bring project files could only mean one thing. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the folders, her mind racing through potential salvage strategies. But deep down, she knew this conversation would change everything. Harrison wasn't alone when she entered his office. Patricia Wong, from Human Resources, sat beside his desk with a manila folder and the carefully neutral expression that HR professionals perfected for difficult situations. "Please, sit down," Harrison said, his usual commanding presence tempered by what might have been regret. Sarah remained standing. "If you're going to fire me, I'd prefer to hear it directly." "We're not firing you," Patricia interjected, "but we are restructuring your role significantly." The words that followed felt surreal. Budget cuts, client retention challenges, the need to right-size the agency for current market conditions. Sarah's position was being eliminated, replaced by a more junior role with reduced responsibilities and a 40% salary cut. "Essentially, you're demoting me," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. "We're offering you an opportunity to rebuild within the organization," Harrison replied. "Your experience remains valuable, but the market demands different approaches now." Sarah looked at the termination package outlined in Patricia's folder. 6 weeks of severance if she accepted the demotion, or 12 weeks if she chose to leave entirely. Either option felt like professional death. "I need time to consider this." "Of course. Take the rest of the week." Sarah gathered her project files and walked back to her office in a daze. Through the glass walls, she could see her team members' faces, some sympathetic, others already calculating how the restructuring might affect their own positions. In the ruthless ecosystem of Madison Avenue, survival often required quickly distancing oneself from sinking colleagues. That evening, Sarah called her parents from her apartment. Her father was between chemotherapy treatments, and his voice sounded stronger than it had in weeks. "They want to demote me or let me go," she said without preamble. "Oh, honey," her mother said, "I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Everything I've worked for is falling apart." Her father's voice came through clearly. "Sarah, do you remember what you wanted to be when you were 8 years old?" The question caught her off guard. "Dad, I don't see how that's relevant. You wanted to be a teacher. You used to line up your dolls and stuffed animals, teaching them about dinosaurs and space exploration. You said you wanted to help people learn new things." The memory surfaced. Reluctantly, Sarah had indeed spent countless childhood hours playing school, filled with genuine excitement about sharing knowledge and watching others discover new ideas. When had that enthusiasm been replaced by the relentless pursuit of profit margins and market share? That was a long time ago. Was it wrong? The dream, I mean, was wanting to help people learn and grow wrong? Sarah didn't answer immediately. For years, she dismissed her childhood aspirations as naive, impractical fantasies that had been properly replaced by adult ambitions. But sitting in her expensive apartment, contemplating the ruins of her carefully constructed life, those early dreams didn't seem foolish at all. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Emma, the junior executive who had requested a transfer, appeared at Sarah's door with 2 cups of coffee and a determined expression. "I heard about the restructuring. I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For abandoning you when things got difficult. You mentored me, taught me everything I know about this industry. I should have shown more loyalty." Sarah accepted the coffee, touched by the gesture. "You made the smart career move. I don't blame you, but I blame myself. You always said that success means lifting others up as you climb. I forgot that lesson." When it mattered most, they sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, looking out at the Manhattan skyline that had been the backdrop to so many ambitious conversations. "Emma, can I ask you something? Do you love this work?" "Really love it. Or do you just love succeeding at it? Emma considered the question carefully. I used to love the creative part, finding ways to connect products with people who genuinely needed them. But lately, it feels more like manipulation than communication. When did that change for you? Honestly, when I started focusing more on impressing you and the other executives than on creating meaningful work. The conversation continued for an hour, touching on topics they'd never discussed during their professional relationship, dreams deferred, values compromised, the difference between achieving success and finding fulfillment. Sarah found herself speaking more honestly than she had in years. That afternoon, she made her decision. Sarah knocked on Harrison's door at p.m., her resignation letter typed and signed. I won't be accepting the demotion, she said, placing the letter on his desk. I'm leaving. Harrison read the letter, his expression unreadable. This is final? Yes, Sarah. You're making a mistake. The industry is small. This will follow you to other agencies. I'm not going to other agencies. Then what will you do? For the first time in months, Sarah smiled genuinely. I'm going to figure that out. The next week passed in a whirlwind of farewells and transitions. Sarah cleaned out her office, said goodbye to colleagues, and tied up loose ends with the few remaining clients. Some conversations were awkward, others surprisingly emotional. Mark stopped by her office on her final day. I've been thinking about what you said to Emma about the difference between success and fulfillment. Maybe it's time I did some soul searching. 2. This industry needs good people like you, Mark. Don't let it change who you are. As Sarah walked out of the agency building for the last time, carrying a small box of personal items, she felt something unexpected relief. The weight she'd been carrying for months, the constant pressure to perform, the anxiety about maintaining her position, all of it lifted as the elevator descended to street level, standing on the sidewalk in the heart of Manhattan, surrounded by the energy and ambition that had defined her adult life. Sarah realized she was no longer afraid. She had lost everything she thought mattered, but she was still standing. The point of no return had arrived, and for the first time in years, Sarah was ready to discover what lay on the other side. Sarah's penthouse apartment, once a symbol of her success, now felt like an expensive prison. Without the daily structure of office life, the spacious rooms seemed to mock her with their emptiness. She'd paid 3 months' rent in advance, but with her savings and the modest severance package, she had perhaps 6 months before serious financial decisions would be unavoidable. The first week of unemployment passed in a haze of late mornings and aimless afternoons. Sarah found herself doing things she hadn't done in years, reading novels, taking long walks through Central Park, cooking actual meals instead of ordering takeout. The novelty was both liberating and terrifying. On Thursday morning, her phone rang. The caller ID showed William Harrison's name. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling. I have a proposition. I'm listening. Morrison Industries called yesterday. They're having problems with the Blackstone campaign. Apparently, it's not resonating with consumers. They specifically asked if you might be available for consulting work. Sarah felt a familiar surge of vindication. And what did you tell them? That I'd reach out to you. They're offering substantial compensation for a short-term project. Interested? The offer was tempting, not just financially, but emotionally. Being wanted again, having her expertise valued, returning to familiar territory where she understood the rules. But something held her back. I appreciate the call, William, but I'm exploring other directions right now. Other directions? Sarah, this is your field. You're one of the best strategists I've ever worked with. After ending the call, Sarah sat in her living room wondering if she'd made another mistake. Turning down lucrative consulting work seemed irrational, especially given her uncertain financial situation. But the thought of returning to the world she'd just escaped felt like stepping backwards into a life that no longer fit. That afternoon, she drove to Connecticut to visit her parents. Her father was having a good day between chemo treatments, and they sat on the back porch watching autumn leaves spiral down from the old maple tree. You look different, he observed. Different how? Calmer, less like you're racing against some invisible clock. Sarah had noticed a change too. For the first time in years, She wasn't checking her phone every few minutes or mentally rehearsing presentations. The constant hum of anxiety that had been her background soundtrack was gradually fading. "Dad, were you happy with your career choices? Any regrets?" Her father had worked as an engineer for 35 years, building bridges and highways throughout New England. It was steady work, respectable but not glamorous. "I loved solving problems," he said thoughtfully. "Every bridge was a puzzle: how to span a river, support the weight, withstand weather and time." The satisfaction came from building something that would help people get where they needed to go. But did you ever wonder about other paths? Things you might have done differently? Of course. But regret is a luxury I've learned to avoid. Every choice led me to your mother, to you, to this life. Even the mistakes taught me something valuable. That evening, Sarah's mother showed her old photo albums from Sarah's childhood. Pictures of school plays, science fairs, family vacations, a life rich with simple pleasures and genuine connections. In many photos, Sarah was teaching or explaining something to cousins, friends, or even adults who were listening with apparent interest. "You were always a natural teacher," her mother said. "Remember how you used to help the neighborhood kids with their homework?" Mrs. Patterson said you explained math concepts better than their actual teachers. The memory stirred something in Sarah that had been dormant for years. She recalled the satisfaction of watching confusion clear from a child's face, the moment when understanding clicked into place. Those experiences had been fulfilling in ways that closing million-dollar deals never were. Driving back to the city Sunday evening, Sarah made an impulsive decision. Instead of taking the direct route to her apartment, she drove through Queens, past the neighborhood where she'd grown up before her parents moved to Connecticut. The streets looked different but familiar, lined with modest homes where hard-working families were building lives based on different values than those that dominated Manhattan. She stopped at her old elementary school, now modernized but still recognizable. Through the windows, she could see bulletin boards displaying student artwork and motivational posters encouraging learning and growth. A sign by the entrance advertised openings for substitute teachers and volunteer tutors. For the first time since leaving the agency, Sarah felt a spark of genuine interest. Monday morning, instead of scanning job listings and advertising trade publications, she researched education requirements for career changers interested in teaching. The process was complex: certification programs, student teaching requirements, significant pay reductions, but not impossible. She called 3 local schools to inquire about volunteer opportunities. The response was enthusiastic. All 3 had immediate needs for tutors and classroom assistants. By Wednesday, Sarah had scheduled visits to observe classes and meet with volunteer coordinators. Her first day at PS 234 in the Bronx was a revelation. The school served a diverse population, many from families struggling economically but rich in culture and aspiration. Sarah was assigned to help 4th graders with reading comprehension, and she was immediately struck by their eagerness to learn despite having limited resources. "Miss Sarah," asked a girl named Maria, "why do some people have more money than others?" The question came during a lesson about community helpers, and Sarah found herself explaining economic concepts in terms a 9-year-old could understand. But Maria's follow-up question stopped her cold. "Do people with more money help people with less money?" Sarah thought about her own life: the expensive apartment, designer clothes, lavish business lunches, and how little of her success had been directed toward helping others. She donated to charities for tax purposes and attended fundraising galas for networking. But had she ever truly used her advantages to lift up those with fewer opportunities? "They should," Sarah answered honestly. "People who are fortunate should help others whenever they can. Like you're helping us with reading?" "Yes, exactly like that." That afternoon, driving back to Manhattan, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in her professional life: the satisfaction of making a direct, positive impact on another person's life. No quarterly reports or profit margins were involved. Just the simple joy of helping a child understand something new. Her expensive apartment felt different when she returned that evening, not like home, but like a beautiful hotel room where she happened to be staying temporarily. She looked around at the artwork, furniture, and objects she'd accumulated as symbols of success, and realized how little emotional attachment she felt to any of it. That night, Sarah called Emma to share her experience volunteering at the school. "I've been thinking about what you said," Emma told her, "about the difference between success and fulfillment. I'm starting to look for work at nonprofits, maybe museums or cultural organizations where I can use my skills for causes I actually care about." "Any regrets about leaving advertising?" "None. I feel like I'm waking up from a dream that wasn't even mine." After the call, Sarah sat by her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. The city was as beautiful as ever, pulsing with ambition and possibility. But she was beginning to understand that her place in it might be very different than she'd imagined. Free fall could be terrifying, but it could also be the only way to discover where you truly belonged. The eviction notice arrived on a cold December morning, delivered by a courier who seemed genuinely apologetic. Sarah stared at the legal document, calculating dates and realizing she'd been so absorbed in her volunteer work and soul-searching that she'd lost track of practical realities. Her savings were nearly depleted. 3 months of penthouse rent, combined with her usual expensive lifestyle and no income, had created a financial crisis she hadn't seen coming. The severance package was gone, spent on groceries, utilities, and the thousand small expenses that accompany urban living. She had 30 days to vacate the apartment. That afternoon, Sarah called 3 employment agencies specializing in marketing and advertising positions. The conversations were humbling. Her resume was impressive, but her sudden departure from the agency had created questions that were difficult to answer diplomatically. "Why did you leave without another position lined up?" asked Rebecca Martinez, a recruiter who specialized in senior-level placements. "I needed time to reassess my career direction." "That's unusual for someone at your level. Most executives have their next move planned before they resign." "I understand that, but sometimes life requires making decisions that don't fit conventional patterns." Rebecca's tone became more cautious. "Sarah, I'll be honest, word travels fast in this industry. The impression is that you were pushed out rather than choosing to leave. That creates challenges for placement." After the third similar conversation, Sarah realized that her advertising career was effectively over. Even if she could secure interviews, the circumstances of her departure would shadow every opportunity. That evening, she began the painful process of evaluating her possessions. What could be sold to extend her financial runway? The designer furniture, expensive artwork, jewelry accumulated over years of high earnings, all of it would need to go. The process was more emotional than she'd anticipated. Each item represented a milestone, a reward for professional achievement, a symbol of the life she'd built. The Hermes scarf she'd worn to her first major client presentation, the vintage Chanel suit she'd bought to celebrate her promotion to director, the abstract painting she'd purchased after landing the biggest account of her career. Now they were just expensive objects that needed to be converted to cash. Sarah's phone rang while she was photographing items for online sale. Her mother's voice carried a forced cheerfulness that barely concealed worry. "Sweetheart, how are you managing? Your father and I have been concerned." "I'm fine, Mom. Just making some adjustments." "Adjustments?" "Sarah, you left your job months ago. What are you living on?" The concern in her mother's voice broke something inside Sarah. She'd been maintaining a facade of having everything under control, but the truth was that her life was unraveling faster than she could manage. "I'm selling some things, and I'm looking for work. In advertising?" "I don't know." "Maybe not." The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Sarah admitted her financial situation, the eviction notice, the reality that her expensive lifestyle had been unsustainable without her corporate salary. Her parents offered help immediately, financial assistance, a place to stay, whatever she needed. "We can wire you money today," her father said, taking the phone. "Enough to keep the apartment for a few more months while you figure things out, Dad." "I can't take your money. You're dealing with medical bills, treatment costs, Sarah. You're our daughter. We help each other in this family." That night, Sarah lay awake in her luxurious bed, staring at the ceiling and confronting the full magnitude of her situation. She was 34 years old, essentially unemployed, facing eviction, and considering financial help from parents who were struggling with cancer treatment expenses. 6 months ago, she'd been a respected executive earning multiple six figures. Now she was planning to sleep on her childhood bed in her parents' house. The next morning brought another blow. Her credit card was declined while buying groceries, a small purchase that would have been insignificant during her corporate days. Standing in line at the checkout counter, fumbling for a different card while other customers waited impatiently, Sarah felt the full weight of how far she'd fallen. But as she walked home carrying a single bag of basic groceries, something unexpected happened. The shame and embarrassment she'd been feeling began to transform into something else, a strange sense of clarity. For years, she'd defined herself by external measures: salary, title, apartment address, designer possessions. Now, stripped of those markers, she was being forced to confront who she actually was beneath all the professional achievements and material accumulations. The volunteer work at PS 234 had shown her that fulfillment could come from contribution rather than acquisition. The conversations with Maria and other students had reminded her that purpose could be found in service rather than success. That afternoon, Sarah called her parents to accept their offer of financial help, not to maintain her current lifestyle, but to create breathing room while she made fundamental changes. "I want to move back home for a while," she told them. "Not permanently, but long enough to figure out what comes next." "Of course, sweetheart," her mother said. "Your room is exactly as you left it, and I want to use this time to explore teaching. Really explore it. Not just volunteer work." Her father's voice carried a warmth she hadn't heard in months. "Sarah, that sounds wonderful. Teaching runs in our family. Your grandmother was a teacher for 40 years. The conversation continued for an hour, covering practical details and emotional realities. For the first time since leaving the agency, Sarah felt like she was moving towards something rather than simply running away. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah systematically dismantled the life she'd built in Manhattan. Most of her expensive possessions sold quickly. Apparently, there was always a market for luxury items among ambitious young professionals building the same lifestyle she was abandoning. The process was cathartic rather than devastating. Each item sold felt like shedding weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. The vintage wine collection, the designer handbags, the expensive exercise equipment she'd rarely used, all of it represented a version of herself that no longer existed. Her last day in the penthouse apartment was surprisingly peaceful. Standing in the empty rooms where she'd spent 3 years climbing the corporate ladder, Sarah felt gratitude rather than regret. This phase of her life had taught her valuable lessons, even if they weren't the lessons she'd expected to learn. Emma stopped by to help with the final boxes. Together, they loaded Sarah's remaining possessions, mostly books, family photos, and a few items with genuine sentimental value, into a rental truck. "Are you scared?" Emma asked as they secured the cargo. "Terrified," Sarah admitted, "but also excited. I haven't felt excited about the future in years. I handed in my resignation yesterday," Emma said quietly. "I'm starting at the Children's Museum next month. 40% pay cut. But I wake up looking forward to work again." They hugged goodbye on the sidewalk outside the building where Sarah had lived at the height of her success. As Emma walked away, Sarah took one last look at the gleaming facade. That had represented everything she'd thought she wanted. Now she was ready to discover what she actually needed. The drive to Connecticut felt like traveling between different worlds. The December landscape was stark but beautiful, bare trees etched against gray skies. Sarah found herself noticing details she'd missed during hurried visits: small farms, historic houses, the simple dignity of communities built around different values than those that dominated Manhattan. Her parents' house appeared exactly as she remembered, though perhaps smaller and more welcoming than the monument to suburban success she'd perceived as a teenager. Her father met her in the driveway, looking stronger than he had in weeks, and helped unload the truck. "Welcome home," he said, embracing her among the boxes that contained her remaining possessions. That evening, unpacking in her childhood bedroom, Sarah found items she'd forgotten: high school yearbooks, college papers, journals filled with dreams and aspirations that seemed both naive and profound. One entry, written during her senior year of college, stopped her cold. I want work that matters, not just to me, but to other people. I want to use whatever talents I have to make the world a little better than I found it. She had written those words 12 years ago, then promptly abandoned them in pursuit of career advancement and financial success. But maybe it wasn't too late to honor that young woman's intentions. Sarah closed the journal and looked around the room where she'd spent her formative years dreaming about the future. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of building a new life based on different principles. Tonight, for the first time in months, she felt genuinely hopeful about what that life might become. She had hit bottom, but sometimes bottom was the most solid foundation from which to rebuild. Spring came early to Connecticut that year, and Sarah found herself noticing things she'd ignored for decades: the gradual return of green to bare branches, the chorus of birds announcing each dawn, the way morning light transformed her parents' garden from ordinary to magical. 3 months had passed since moving home, and the rhythm of small-town life had begun to feel natural rather than confining. She'd enrolled in an alternative certification program for career-changing professionals interested in teaching, attending classes 2 evenings a week at a nearby community college. Her father's treatment was progressing well. The chemotherapy had been brutal, but recent scans showed the tumors shrinking significantly. His energy was returning gradually, and he'd begun taking short walks with Sarah around their neighborhood. "You know what I've realized," he said during one of their morning walks. "Being sick taught me to pay attention to what actually matters. Time moves differently when you're not taking it for granted." Sarah understood completely. Without the constant pressure of deadlines and client demands, she'd discovered that days could have texture and depth rather than just productivity metrics. She was learning to measure time by moments of connection rather than tasks completed. Her volunteer work at PS 234 had evolved into a more formal role. The principal, Dr. Patricia Williams, had offered her a position as a teacher's aide while she completed her certification requirements. The pay was minimal, but the experience was invaluable. "You have a natural gift with the children," Dr. Williams told her during a performance review. "They respond to your authenticity. Too many adults talk down to kids or treat them like small adults. You speak to them as equals while still maintaining appropriate boundaries." Sarah had never received professional feedback that felt so genuinely meaningful. In advertising, praise had been tied to revenue generation and client satisfaction. Here, success was measured by entirely different criteria: a struggling reader's breakthrough, a shy child's increased participation, the moment when abstract concepts clicked into understanding. Her favorite student remained Maria, now in 5th grade and reading above grade level. The progress had been gradual but consistent, built on patience and encouragement rather than pressure and competition. "Miss Sarah," Maria asked one afternoon while they worked on a writing assignment, "why did you used to have a different job?" "I thought I wanted different things then. I was chasing success instead of looking for meaning." "What's the difference?" Sarah paused, considering how to explain complex concepts to an 11-year-old. "Success is about getting things you want. Meaning is about becoming the person you're supposed to be. Are you becoming the person you're supposed to be now?" The question lingered with Sarah long after the school day ended. Was she? For the first time in her adult life, she was pursuing work that aligned with her values rather than her ambitions. The financial sacrifice was significant. She was earning less than she'd spent on clothing in previous years, but the emotional rewards were immeasurable. That evening, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. William Harrison's voice sounded different, less commanding, more reflective. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling. I have some news I thought you'd find interesting." "Of course, William. What's going on?" "Morrison Industries fired Blackstone and Associates last week. Their campaign was a complete disaster. Consumer testing showed negative brand association. Sales dropped 15%, and they're facing a public relations nightmare." Sarah felt a familiar surge of vindication, but it was tempered by something she couldn't quite identify. "I'm sorry to hear that. What happens now?" They want to meet with you directly. They're willing to offer substantial compensation for you to clean up the mess and develop a new strategy. The offer was generous, more money than Sarah would earn in 3 years of teaching, plus the opportunity to rebuild her advertising reputation. Morrison Industries was admitting they'd made a mistake, validating everything she'd believed about her original campaign proposal. That's flattering, Sarah said slowly, but I'm not available for consulting work right now. Sarah, this is Morrison Industries. This kind of opportunity doesn't come along often. I understand that, but I'm committed to other projects. After ending the call, Sarah sat in her parents' garden considering the implications. 6 months ago, she would have seen this offer as validation and redemption. Now, the thought of returning to the world of corporate politics and profit-driven decision-making felt like stepping backward into a life that no longer fit. Her mother found her there. An hour later, still contemplating the conversation. You look troubled, sweetheart. Sarah shared the details of Harrison's call and her response. Her mother listened thoughtfully, then asked a simple question. What does your heart tell you? That I'm exactly where I need to be. Then trust that feeling. The next morning brought a different kind of opportunity. Dr. Williams approached Sarah with a proposal that would reshape her future in ways she couldn't have imagined. Sarah, I'm wondering if you'd be interested in developing a new program here at the school. We've received a grant to create an innovative literacy initiative, and I think you'd be perfect to lead it. Lead it? But I'm not even certified yet. You will be by September. And this program would be unlike anything we've done before, combining traditional teaching methods with modern technology and community partnerships. It's exactly the kind of creative thinking you bring to everything you do. The program would serve students from kindergarten through 8th grade, focusing on children who were struggling with reading and writing. Sarah would work with a team of teachers and volunteers to develop individualized learning plans, incorporate digital tools, and create connections between classroom learning and real-world applications. It would mean taking on significant responsibility, Dr. Williams continued, but it would also give you the freedom to innovate and experiment. The position comes with a competitive salary and the opportunity to make a genuine impact on hundreds of children's lives. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in her corporate career: excitement about professional possibilities that aligned perfectly with her values and interests. This wasn't about climbing a career ladder or accumulating wealth. It was about building something meaningful that would benefit others. When do you need an answer? Take your time. But Sarah, I hope you'll seriously consider it. We need leaders who understand that education is about more than test scores and graduation rates. It's about helping young people discover their potential and prepare for lives of purpose. That afternoon, Sarah called Emma to share the news. Her friend was thriving at the Children's Museum, developing educational programs that spark curiosity and creativity in young visitors. It sounds perfect for you, Emma said. Are you going to accept? I think so. It feels right in a way that advertising never did. Any regrets about leaving the corporate world? Sarah considered the question carefully. None. I thought success meant accumulating things and achieving status. Now I understand that fulfillment comes from contributing to something larger than yourself. We were living other people's definitions of success, Emma observed. Now we're creating our own. That evening, Sarah walked through the neighborhood where she'd grown up, seeing it with new appreciation for the simple rhythms of community life. Children played in yards while their parents tended gardens. Neighbors chatted over fence lines about ordinary concerns: upcoming school events, local politics, the weather. This was the life she'd left behind in pursuit of Manhattan sophistication, dismissing it as boring and limiting. Now she recognized it as grounded and authentic, a foundation for building meaning rather than just accumulating achievements. As the sun set behind the familiar houses of her childhood, Sarah felt the first stirrings of genuine excitement about the future. Not the anxious anticipation of professional advancement, but the deeper satisfaction of aligning her work with her values. She was ready to accept Dr. Williams' offer and begin building something entirely new. The literacy center took shape throughout the summer like a community garden tended by many hands. Sarah spent her days transforming an unused classroom into an innovative learning space, complete with flexible seating areas, interactive technology stations, and cozy reading nooks designed to make struggling students feel safe and supported. Her team included Mrs. Rodriguez, a veteran teacher with 30 years of experience, Jake Chen, a recent college graduate passionate about educational technology, and volunteer reading specialists from the local library and community college. Together, they developed a program that treated each child as an individual with unique learning needs rather than a standardized test score. Sarah called Emma to share Maria's announcement. "She wants to be a teacher because of you," Emma said. "That's an incredible legacy. It's humbling. 6 months ago, I thought legacy meant landing major accounts and climbing corporate ladders. Now I understand it's about the lives you touch and the positive changes you inspire. Any regrets about the path that brought you here?" Sarah considered the question while looking out at her parents' garden, now dormant for winter but rich with the promise of spring renewal. "I needed to experience that corporate success to understand what fulfillment actually looks like." The contrast made the lesson clear. As winter settled over Connecticut, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary year that had transformed every aspect of her life. 12 months ago, she had been a high-powered executive focused entirely on professional achievement and material accumulation. Now she was a teacher whose greatest satisfaction came from watching children discover their own capabilities. The financial sacrifice had been significant. She was earning a fraction of her previous salary, but her quality of life had improved immeasurably. She slept better, laughed more, and felt connected to work that aligned with her deepest values. One snowy December afternoon, Sarah received a surprise visitor at the literacy center. William Harrison appeared at her classroom door, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said. "I was visiting family in the area and wanted to see what you've been up to." Sarah gave him a tour of the center, explaining the program's philosophy and showing him student work displayed on bulletin boards. Harrison listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about teaching methods and student progress. "This is impressive," he said finally. "Really? Impressive. You've built something meaningful here. Thank you. It's the most satisfying work I've ever done." Harrison studied the displays of student writing and artwork, his expression thoughtful. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I let business pressures override my judgment about your value to the agency. Losing you was a mistake, William. We both made decisions based on what seemed right at the time. I don't have any hard feelings. Still, I wanted you to know that the agency hasn't been the same since you left. We've lost our creative edge, our willingness to take risks. Everything feels safe and predictable now." As Harrison prepared to leave, he turned back with one final observation. "You've found something here that most of us spend our entire careers searching for, work that matters beyond the paycheck." After he left, Sarah remained in the classroom grading reading assessments and preparing lessons for the following week. The snow continued falling outside, creating a peaceful backdrop for her reflection on how dramatically her life had changed. She was building something new, not just a literacy program, but an entirely different definition of success based on contribution rather than accumulation, purpose rather than profit, and relationships rather than achievements. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she belonged. By spring, the Literacy Center had become a model that other schools throughout the state were eager to replicate. Educational researchers from the University of Connecticut visited to study Sarah's methods, and she found herself invited to speak at conferences about innovative approaches to reading instruction. The attention was flattering but secondary to the daily satisfaction of watching her students grow. The program now served 45 children, with a waiting list that extended into the following academic year. More importantly, standardized test scores showed remarkable improvement across all grade levels, but Sarah had learned to measure success by different metrics. When Tommy, the third grader who had once been labeled learning disabled, read a story aloud to the entire school assembly without stumbling, the standing ovation moved several teachers to tears. When Marcus published his poetry in the school literary magazine, his parents attended the launch event with pride that radiated throughout the auditorium. Numbers tell one story, Sarah explained to a visiting delegation from the State Department of Education. But transformation tells another. Our goal isn't just improving test scores, it's helping children develop confidence, curiosity, and a lifelong love of learning. The program's community partnership component had expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations. Local businesses now competed to host student visits and provide mentorship opportunities. The traditional approach assumes all children learn the same way, Sarah explained to parents during an information session in July. Our program recognizes that every student brings different strengths, challenges, and interests to the learning process. The parent turnout exceeded expectations. Maria's mother, Carmen, had spread word throughout the Latino community about the teacher who really listens. Other parents shared similar testimonials about Sarah's patience and effectiveness during her volunteer work. My daughter actually looks forward to reading now, said Janet Morrison, whose 8-year-old son had struggled with dyslexia. For the first time, someone is teaching him strategies that work with his brain instead of against it. Sarah's approach combined traditional phonics instruction with multimedia learning tools, hands-on activities, and real-world applications. Students read stories about their own communities, wrote letters to local officials about issues they cared about, and participated in video conferences with authors and illustrators. But the program's most innovative element was its community partnership component. Local businesses, senior centers, and organizations provided mentors and real-world learning opportunities. Students visited the veterinary clinic to read to recovering animals, interviewed elderly residents about local history, and wrote restaurant reviews for the community newsletter. Learning happens everywhere, Sarah told her team during a planning meeting. When we connect classroom instruction to actual life experiences, children understand that education has purpose beyond just passing tests. Her father, now finished with chemotherapy and declared cancer-free, became one of the program's most enthusiastic volunteers. His engineering background made him perfect for helping students with math concepts, but his gentle teaching style was what made the real difference. Grandpa David explains things so I can understand them, said Tommy, a third grader who had previously been labeled as having a learning disability. He doesn't make me feel stupid when I ask questions. Sarah watched her father working with the children and saw him coming alive in ways she hadn't witnessed during his corporate career. Retirement had given him the freedom to share his knowledge, without the pressure of deadlines and profit margins. This is what I wish I'd been doing all along, he told Sarah one afternoon after a particularly successful tutoring session. Building bridges was satisfying, but building confidence in young minds is transformative. As summer progressed, Sarah found herself developing skills she'd never needed in advertising: patience with slow progress, creativity in problem solving, and the ability to celebrate small victories. When Maria successfully read her first chapter book, the joy on both their faces was worth more than any client presentation she'd ever delivered. The program officially launched in September with 25 students ranging from kindergarten through 8th grade. Word of mouth brought additional enrollment requests within the first month, requiring Sarah to expand the program and recruit additional volunteers. Dr. Williams observed several sessions and was consistently impressed by the atmosphere Sarah had created. I've been in education for 25 years, she told Sarah during an October evaluation meeting. I've never seen struggling readers become this confident this quickly. It's not magic, Sarah replied. It's just treating children like capable human beings instead of problems to be fixed. The success metrics were encouraging, but what moved Sarah most were the individual transformations. Marcus, a 7th grader who had been labeled as having behavioral problems, discovered a passion for writing poetry. Jessica, a kindergartner from a non-English speaking family, became the unofficial translator for other students with similar backgrounds, but it was Maria who provided the most profound validation of Sarah's career change. Now in 6th grade, and reading at a high school level, she had been selected to represent her school in a regional writing competition. Miss Sarah, she said one afternoon while working on her competition essay, I want to be a teacher when I grow up. Just like you, That's wonderful, Maria. What kind of teacher? The kind who helps kids believe they're smart even when they think they're not. Sarah felt tears welling up as she recognized her own journey reflected in Maria's words. She had spent years believing that intelligence was measured by income and status rather than by the ability to learn, grow, and contribute to others' development. That evening,